Hello, I'm Jimmy and welcome to episode 6 of my sub-3 hour marathon series. In this episode I'll be talking a little bit about this Stryd foot pod and why I use power as a metric that I train and race with, and as testing week. So I'm going to do a 3-minute time trial and a 12-minute time trial. Let's get into it. This week's a bit of a down week, so the idea is to reduce mileage a bit, reduce intensity, so I haven't got any sessions as such planned. The reason for that is to just have a bit of a break, let the body absorb some of the training I've been doing, but also, importantly, it's a testing week. So I've got a series of time trials lined up. I did a 10k race on the Sunday just gone, which, if you saw my last video, turned out to be a bit of a failure, only in the sense that it wasn't an all-out effort, but that's okay. I've got a 3-minute time trial today.
That was horrible.
And a 12-minute all-out effort on Saturday. So the reason for these time trials are twofold. Obviously to gauge fitness, to see where I'm at, but you've probably noticed I talk a lot about power, and that's because I use power as the primary metric by which I gauge intensity. And in order to use power properly, you need an accurate critical power, or an estimate of your critical power. So I'll explain more about that later on in the video, but today's plan is to do the 3-minute all-out effort. It's been pouring with rain all night, so there are some really big puddles on my usual track. So I'm going to try running this on the main road, so hopefully I don't get hit by a car. This road, it's a little bit uphill, and it's quite windy this morning as well, but I'm not too worried because I train by power. So we'll talk more about that later, so it won't ruin the results. I'm not too interested in pace, I'm more looking for the average power.
That was horrible. I don't know what happened. I just completely died. Boy, that was terrible. Oh, wow. Wow. Longest 3 minutes of my life.
Well, that was absolutely horrible. So I think as to what went wrong, it's probably a combination of a few things. Maybe I needed more rest. So after the race on Sunday, I didn't take any time off. In fact, that afternoon I went and did a heavy weight session. Then the following day I ran 20Ks. Yesterday I only did 10, but still, I mean, even though it wasn't completely maxed out on Sunday, it was still a big effort, and I probably needed a bit more rest. But secondly, I think it's a classic case of overcompensation. So I was so annoyed at myself for not going all out on Sunday that I think I overcompensated today and just went way too hard. But it's such a different feeling from what I'm used to in marathon training, that feeling of just massive lactic acid buildup. It's actually quite funny. You feel like you lose control. As much as I wanted to go faster, my legs were just like blocks of concrete. I just couldn't. And Also, I think psychologically, because it was a different route, I wasn't sure when the run was going to end, and I couldn't see my watch. It was dark, you know, when you're moving, so I couldn't actually see how much time I had left. And I think psychologically, it's really useful to know how much longer you've got. Like on the footage, you probably see I'm constantly looking at my watch. I just didn't know when it was going to end. I was dying. But I mean, it is a shame because I was really hoping for a valid test, but I'll have to get back and look at the data. But I expect that was a lot worse than what I did 10 weeks ago in terms of average power. But that's okay, we move on. Hopefully I can nail it on Saturday for the 12-minute test. Onwards and upwards.
Well, it's Friday now, and I've had a bit of a chance to look at the numbers from the time trial on Wednesday, and it's perfectly obvious what went wrong. I just went out way too hot. I averaged 2 minutes 42 for the first 30 seconds, which is ludicrous. That is way too fast for me. And over the first minute, I averaged 2 minutes 52. So that is just way too fast. And as I've already said, I think I was overcompensating. I was so determined not to undercook this one that I overcooked it big time. And by the time I realized, it was way too late. I was done. And also, as I was running, I should have looked at my watch more. I could feel it buzzing because I set up alarms to tell me when I was below and above my target zone. So I could feel it buzzing, but I just assumed it was because I was going too slow. So I kept speeding up, whereas in actual fact, it was buzzing because I was going way too fast. So there we go. Lesson learned. I really stuffed that one up, but we've got another chance tomorrow. But I thought I'd use this video to talk a little bit about why I use power as the primary metric that I use to gauge running intensity. But before we do that, it's probably worth discussing a little bit about intensities and how we estimate them, because of course there are lots of different metrics we use. And I find it really helpful to think about what we're actually trying to achieve with these metrics so we don't get too hung up on either one and we aren't a slave to any of those numbers. So what we're trying to do with heart rate, with power, with RPE, with paces, is we're trying to estimate or guess a physiological process that's happening inside our bodies. We're trying to estimate which physiological energy systems we're using. And I say estimate because there's no way of measuring that properly outside of a lab. And so we use these metrics to try and estimate what's happening inside our bodies. And I think that's really useful to remember. And I think it's better to use several of these metrics to triangulate and really hone in on that running intensity, because every metric we use has advantages and disadvantages, power included. But let's take heart rate, for instance. Heart rate's really good in a lot of instances, but it's very affected by external factors. So it's very affected by temperature, by humidity, by stress, by how much sleep you've had, if you're sick. So there are lots of things that can throw your heart rate out. And it also suffers from cardiac delay. So it takes about 4 minutes for our heartbeat to catch up with our effort level, which on longer runs is okay. But if we're doing shorter interval work, heart rate's going to be no good there. Like let's say we're doing a 1 minute fartlek session. By the time our heart rate's had a chance to catch up, well, it won't have a chance to catch up because the interval's only 1 minute. So it's going to be completely useless trying to use heart rate there. Pace is another one. So with pace, that's often okay on the flat, when it's not windy, when the temperature is similar to the temperature that you tested in. But as soon as we start introducing hills and wind and humidity and temperature, all of that can change. And those paces we get to begin with, they're very rough estimates anyway, because they're usually based, well, we usually get them from an online calculator or something. So we plug in a recent 5K time, for instance, and it spits out a whole bunch of paces to train at and what we might be capable of in a race. Those are based on population averages, and they really are a pretty rough guess. So pace certainly has disadvantages as well. RPE, so rate of perceived exertion, that's another really good one, but it takes experience to really nail that one, as I think I demonstrated on Wednesday just gone. So that distance, or rather that time of 3 minutes, isn't a time I'm used to racing. And consequently, I completely stuffed it up. And by the time I realized that it felt wrong, it was way too late. I'd already completely ruined the session. So RPE is really good, and again, it's affected by things like how we're feeling, like who we're with. It's affected by a lot of things, and it does take experience to get good at, which is obviously no good if you're a beginner. I remember when I was first starting out, I would just get really frustrated listening to advice like, run easy. Well, what's that meant to feel like? Because it's all relative, isn't it? Like my idea of easy could be very different to your idea of easy. So RPE has its drawbacks. And so we come to power. So the reason I use power is because I use the Stryd foot pod. So if I wasn't using the Stryd foot pod, I wouldn't use power. And that's because that little pod measures wind, it measures temperature, it measures humidity, elevation gain and loss. So it takes all of these things into account and gives you a power reading, taking all of that into account. So it doesn't actually matter if I'm running uphill, it's going to know that, and that's going to be reflected in my power reading, so I can still hit the target training intensity that I'm aiming for. And it's the same with wind and temperature and humidity. It takes all of that into account. So I'm much less reliant on the environment. It will take that into account and still give me a really reliable power number to aim for, so that I can really nail that training intensity. So that's a real plus, and it makes training a lot easier. So, rather than trying to guess what pace you need to adjust to if it's really windy or you're going uphill, it's beautiful. You just stick to the power, and the Stryd pod works all that out, and it's a really great way to train. It's also really good for races. So when you come to a race, especially long races, you'll often have hilly sections, you'll have bits into the wind. It's so good having this Stryd pod to take all of that into account and to have a reliable power number to aim to average rather than a pace. It just takes all of the guesswork out of the day. And so the race power number that it comes up with to start with is also really accurate, which is another reason why I use the Stryd pod. It's not based on population averages. It's your data from the last 3 months. And in order to get, so they use something called a power duration curve, which is basically what you are capable of doing over various time domains. So it knows what I can do over, say, 1 minute, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, all the way up to a couple of hours. And again, that's not guessed, it's based on what I've done. But to get that curve really accurate, you need to do regular time trials, which is what I'm doing this week. So there are certain key time domains that you need to do. 3 minutes is one of them, 12 minutes is another one, and about between 20 and 40 minutes is another one. And it uses these tests to compile data and work out what they call your critical power. So critical power is roughly equivalent to the anaerobic threshold, or LT2. And it's really useful having that number. So they base everything else off that, and you use that to guide your training. Oh, another thing to mention is that in order to use power, you've got to be using the same manufacturer and their same kind of software. And that's because they haven't agreed on what running power actually is. There's no agreement as to what running power is and how to measure it. And so consequently, all manufacturers have different ways of calculating it. So Apple Watch does it natively, Garmin does it natively, Coros does a foot pod, and all of these manufacturers use different ways of working out your power. So you can't compare any of them to each other. It's got to be within the same kind of ecosystem, which is a little bit annoying. But I've been super happy with that Stryd pod. And even though it is expensive, I think for me, it's well worth the money, because if I wasn't doing that, I'd probably, because the kind of guy I am, I'd probably be trying to do blood lactate tests every few months just to update my training zones so I know I'm hitting the right zone all the time. And those are expensive. So my local one is $200 a pop. So the Stryd pod really pays for itself, and actually it's much more useful because I did do a blood lactate test once, and it was fun. It was really good, but it's not exactly translatable everywhere because you do it on a treadmill, which is very different to running outside, and it's very much dependent on what happens on the day. So yes, it's useful, but I think the data we get from the Stryd foot pod is way more useful. And it really is personalized to me and adapts with my training. And I think it's really good. So that's why I use Power. And I hope that's helpful. I mean, try it out. But like I say, I wouldn't be using Power if I wasn't using the Stryd pod for all the reasons I mentioned.
Well, 12-minute test, here we go. Is it weird that I'm nervous? Okay, nice and controlled. 3, 2, 1, go.
Soul's just a container. I can't tell you what to write, the words without the paper. Take my ego for a drive, leave it out at the 110 sign, in the kitchen after 5, in the hallway before 9.
Well, I'm trying not to be too gutted about that. My performance wasn't quite where I was hoping it would be, but that's okay. If you look at the power curve for the run, it was really even, so I paced myself well. I could feel at the start that today wasn't going to be the day, and I could feel my watch buzzing telling me that I was below my power range. I needed to speed up, but I didn't because I knew that on the day I just couldn't sustain that. And you saw on the video I was completely cooked at the end. So in terms of effort level and execution, really good. But as I said, the performance wasn't where I was hoping it would be. And I think there are a few reasons for that. I mean, firstly, I'm a little bit sick, like not majorly, but a little bit sick. And it's the cost of being a teacher, I think. In the winter months, we kind of permanently have got something going on. So I'm a little bit sick, didn't sleep very well, but probably more than that. I mean, I keep saying that I'm a beginner runner, which I am in terms of time. I haven't been running long, but I have worked really hard. And in terms of ability, I'm probably much more of an intermediate runner now. And I think I'm at the point where I can no longer expect to PB in every distance, in every single race, every time. You know, that's why we train specifically for certain distances. So I've been training specifically for the marathon. And as I've seen in my training, my fitness has greatly improved in that. And I've kind of been neglecting the shorter distance kind of VO2 max 5K effort. And you know, that's we have to, like, I'm training for a marathon, but I think I'm at the level now where without that specific training, I can't just expect to, in the midst of a marathon block, suddenly start PBing in all these shorter distances that I haven't trained for. So I do try and do a 5K pace workout every month. Well, yeah, every month. But the last couple I've missed due to sickness, so I haven't had that VO2 max stimulus for quite a while. And it shows. And I need to be really, I think, logical about that and just accept the fact that I'm at the level now where I do need that specific training. Like, my fitness has improved. There's no denying that. From all the training, from the 10K race, my fitness over the longer distances has really picked up. But I can't expect that necessarily to translate straight away into those shorter distances because I just haven't trained it. So VO2 max is one of those things that if we don't keep stimulating it, we lose it, which is disheartening. But I need to remember that I haven't lost fitness. It's just moved to a different place. And that's really important to remember. And coming off the previous marathon training block I did, I remember that in the months after the marathon where I was focusing on 5K, I experienced a huge jump in fitness over that distance. So I think yeah, and I know that's going to happen again. So after this marathon block, when I go back to the speed work, I'm fully expecting those shorter distances to have a big jump up in ability level, but I think it's unreasonable to expect that now. And I've been training specifically for the marathon, and that's where I'm going to see big fitness gains. So I need to keep that in mind and not beat myself up too much about this morning. Another positive was, I think, just that I kept going. So I was really close to giving up at the end there. Yeah, and so I think one of the things I love about doing these regular time trials is just the mental training that it gives. Because running, as I'm learning, is a lot of it's a mental game. And especially with a time trial like that, where, you know, it's not a race. I'm out there by myself. It's dark at kind of 5 o'clock in the morning. There's just no need to keep going. And the struggle is real. Because our brains are designed to protect our body, and when we're reaching that limit, we really have to fight that urge to stop. And let me tell you, I was close to giving up this morning, because I knew that I wasn't going to be setting any PBs. I knew today wasn't my day, and so I really had to fight to keep going, and I'm really glad I did. So looking back to that 3-minute test this week as well, I think that's another really positive thing. I went deep into the well this week, deeper than I've ever been, I think, and that's really good. And you know, in going that deep during training, you know, it's all kind of training our mind and coming up with tactics for dealing with that scenario when all these evil voices are telling us to stop and give up. And this morning for me, what worked was just imagining going across that finish line in October and seeing the clock and it says 3 hours and 1 second. How devastating would that be? And so I find that a useful motivator when it gets really hard in training, to think, okay, I'm training now for the last 10K in that marathon. I'm training for those last 2 seconds to make it 3 hours and 1 second to 2 hours 59 seconds. So 2 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds. So I found that helpful. I also tried the Kipchoge smiling thing. Don't know if that worked or not, but yeah, I mean that's all right. I'm happy that I executed the 12-minute trial well. And yep, this week I really need to remember that I can't expect to PB in every distance every time. My fitness has improved, even though that performance wasn't what I was hoping for. It's just moved to a different place. I'm a lot stronger over the longer distances, and should take courage from the 10K race on Sunday. I performed better than I thought I would do, and I was nowhere near all out. So that's a really positive sign. So going into next week, really hoping, please God, solid 3 weeks of no sickness, no injury, no interruptions, just a really good 3-week training block before my next series of tests. Come on, let's go. I'll see you next week.